Good evening, Western Standard viewers. I'm opinion editor Nigel Hannaford, and you're watching The Hannaford Show. Canadians were scandalized last week when they learned that a man suspected of deep terrorist links with the ISIS organization, a man indeed who had been believed to have been photographed as part of the cast of one of ISIS's infamous execution videos, had been arrested in Canada and has been charged with terrorist activities here. As if that were not enough, it is revealed that he is a Canadian citizen. What are we to make of this? The police have not said what this man, his name is Alexander Dalziel, they have not said what specifically he was intending to do, he and his son, but edged weapons were removed from the scene of the arrest. People ask how this could happen. How could a terrorist slip through Canada's immigration screening test? And we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the security implications of Canada's vastly enlarged immigration program. We are taking in something like 400,000 people a year. Are all of them just wanting to be good Canadians as we define good Canadians? With me today, very grateful to have Alex Dalziel, who is, and I'm going to just read this because this is an impressive resume. Alex Dalziel is a senior fellow and national security project lead at the Ottawa-based Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And Alex, you have spent more than 20 years in Canada's national security community. That's the Canada School of Public Service, Department of National Defence, Canada Border Securities Agency, and during that time you worked across multiple operational and strategic domains. And I notice here you were also attached to the Privy Council office, which, having been in that part of the world, I know is a very big deal. You, sir, are an expert. Welcome to the show.
Nigel, pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, Alex, let's go to the big question. How does an ISIS member slip through the immigration screening net? I have written that the Liberals are very good at grand gestures, like a robust immigration policy, but they're hopeless at actually doing government and taking care of the small details, such as screening people. How say you?
Well, I would say that some of the challenges, you're exactly right to put it at this question of screening. You know, immigration security screening is a core part of border security and how we maintain the integrity of our immigration system. You mentioned earlier 400,000 new permanent residents a year. Actually, we're very close to 500,000 new permanent residents a year. So this is a system working at full speed. Something like 5.2 million applications in the year 2022. We had during that period 430,000 people apply for permanent residence. That is up to 470,000 in 2023. So we're talking very large numbers. So, within that, the security screening part is only one part of the process. But as I said, it's fundamental to maintaining. So, some of these things extend beyond the current government. I mean, the challenges of security screening certainly predate this government. They predate the Harbour government. I mean, they're an ongoing challenge, and you need to evolve with the circumstances in the world. So I'd pick out a couple of points here about how do you slip through. Certainly bigger volume, more people coming in, the greater likelihood some of them are going to be malign individuals with negative intentions. We have a fundamental tension in the system that the system is designed to bring people into the country, not keep people out, right? There's economic and social motivations for that. And that part, immediately kind of creates a certain balance in the system about, what are the purposes of screening and the overall endpoint. When you're talking hard numbers and reaching hard numbers, there's a pressure to deliver those hard numbers. I think that raises questions about capacity in the system. We talk a lot about the growth under the Trudeau government of the public service, and we've seen those same phenomena partly at Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, IRCC. It's gone up like 34% in terms of the people working there. But those people don't primarily work on security. Right, they work on the processing and integrating security information in as one part. CBSA, which is really the pointy end of this, the Border Security Agency, they're doing a lot of the screening. So a separate ministry, some real benefits to that, but they are the ones that are looking at various security dimensions, whether that's terrorism, whether that's war criminality, whether that's organized crime, whether that's a criminal record, all the things that would make you what they call inadmissible to Canada. So there's a capacity question here, I think. CBSA hasn't grown quite as much. And I think there's a fundamental problem talking solely about human resource growth in terms of numbers as opposed to training, knowledge, capabilities. I think there's, I've already alluded to it a bit, preparedness of the system, awareness across the immigration process of national security dimensions. This has been a general challenge in the public service that in today's world with, polycrisis, multiple threat, however you want to call it, there's new ways you have to think about accomplishing domestic goals even, right, let alone international ones.
So Alex, do you think there's just too few people with too many applications to screen?
So I put a bit of nuance on that. I think maybe not always the right people with the right skill set, not the right tools to do that effectively. I'd point to two things that, again, the Canadian government has not been strong on in my experience. One is hiring people with the language skills that are going to make you effective against dealing with the current threat picture. So this is people that speak foreign languages, whether that's Spanish, whether that's Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, Chinese, Persian, all the different languages, that some of our threat actors are coming from. I think in terms of what the intelligence community will call open source intelligence. So, this is using materials that are publicly available, like the video that you speak of that's, currently causing, that's being brought to light in the case of the ISIS arrest last week. You have to be able to find that. You have to be able to identify that. You have to connect it to the individual. There's a lot of tools that are out there now. I think it's important, that Canadians be aware of that and be pushing the government to make sure that the analysts who work on this have access to those tools. So, quantity isn't always quality. I think there is a slight mismeasure between how much immigration has grown, IRCC versus CBSA, the border service. The border service is not just people doing intelligence and immigration screening. These are the people who are right at the front lines on the borders. And there is a question too for the immigration officers who are IRCC people working at our embassies and missions abroad, how they're being equipped and positioned to deal with this too. Do they have the intelligence that they need? Are they getting that support from across the system? So yeah, I'm a little reluctant to throw in more people at problems all the time. I think that, in some cases there is just a basic need. If we look in the past, at, terrorist cases that have led to catastrophe, often say the security services will be following 5 groups, but it was a 6th group, right, that eluded their net. So, those are raw human numbers. It takes numbers to process information, to do surveillance, to do all the things that can potentially be important to law enforcement. So, but I would caution that this is an issue where we need to be thinking about technology and we need to be thinking about the training, background, and knowledge that the people doing this work have.
So as things stand, is probably with 400,000, 500,000 people to screen, there is probably a failure rate that doesn't mean the system isn't working. It's just that any procedure that is done repetitively, there will be fails. We were talking earlier about the number of people coming in and what would 1/10 of 1% look like. It's obviously still quite a number of potential fails there. But one of the things that, if I were writing talking points for the Liberal government as they try to defend themselves, now that the Conservatives and the NDP have united to ask for a special meeting on this matter,
Right.
I would say, well, it doesn't happen very often. And I mean, we're a pretty peaceful country and everybody's integrating very well. Then I would say, if I were writing for the Conservatives, I would say this stuff happens all the time, sir. It's look at the Air India crash. There's 350 people killed there back in 85. Look at the plans of the Toronto 18 who are going to bomb the CN Tower and try and storm Parliament and behead people on camera. Look at there's trouble within the Sikh community, which has been very high profile. Mississauga event. So actually, there is a problem. So let me ask you, as the expert in field here, Alex, should Canadians be concerned?
I think Canadians should demand that the national security screening process be as modern, advanced, and world leading. We want to be a world leader in immigration and bringing people in, then the integrity of the system deeply matters, both for the planned outcomes and for the general trust and confidence that Canadians have in this. Look, our immigration system overall is a success. I mean, our prosperity, etc. I mean, there's very little question that the benefits of immigration are huge. We will not see changes in immigration that don't see us bringing in hundreds of thousands of people. Now, you can debate whether 500,000 is the right number, or is it 300,000? But I don't think anyone's going to change that political consensus. Canada is a rare status, pretty much amongst all of our allies, that immigration is not a controversial issue much of the time in this country, and we need to work very hard to keep it that way. So, in terms of, thinking about this, I mean, like the existence of within these streams of people who elude and have, intentions that are damaging to the Canadian populace, this is just a function of what goes on in the immigration system. In Canada, one thing that worries me, Nigel, it's been very historical here, is we have what I call Canadian exceptionalism. We tend to imagine that somehow we're excluded from a lot of the trends that are shaping the rest of the world. Partly that's a function of being in North America, protected by 3 Cs, having a generally, very productive partner to the south. But, whether you're talking about terrorism, as you mentioned with the examples that you've given, whether you're talking about organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, whether you're talking about people, seeking to, who've worked for repressive regimes, flee here and hide, war criminals, all these things exist, right? And that does need to be accepted. I mean, I don't think it's an indictment of the entire system, but I think, we have a general problem in this country across the board in taking national security seriously, somehow thinking, oh, well, the Americans will deal with that, or they face more problems, or this is something in the Middle East, or this is something in Europe. I think, as your examples show, I mean, we've had issues with terrorism over decades. I think, frankly, we're doing a better job at understanding that, some of these issues, come. And I mean, and let's face it too, right? I mean, there's an issue between people eluding the immigration, system. And then there's a question of becoming criminalized and radicalized in Canada after that fact, right? I mean, and this happens as well. So, the immigration part, I think, comes down to, in my mind, if you want to maintain the integrity of the system, the trust in the system, you can't deprioritize the national security piece. It's specialists. It's about a small number of people. But, how many people were involved in 9/11? I mean, how many people does it take to conduct a mass attack event? I mean, looking at, a known ISIS member, or at least someone who joined the group, had, potentially committed atrocities before coming to Canada. We've seen the mass attacks with machetes, with other things. Canada is unfortunately in the same space as many of our partners and allies. That's worrying, but it can also be a source of comfort. We've got partners we can work on this with, and I think that's, part of the solution is, in fact.
I wonder, Alex, sometimes if the RCMP and CSIS are actually too good at it, because if nothing happens, people will start to think that there isn't a problem. You mentioned 9/11 a moment ago, and after that happened, everybody knew that it was a huge problem. And then I started, at that time I was still before my time in government, so I was paying attention to this through a news lens, but I noticed a number of reports coming through of foiled plots. And of course they made a headline, page 3, for a day.
Right.
And then, oh, well, we took care of that and everything is all right. Whereas in actual fact, this stuff is going on all the time. Yeah. And as it was famously said, we have to be on it 100% of the time. They, the bad guys, only need to succeed once.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Alex, once is all it would take, I think, to make this country seem very untrustworthy in the eyes of its allies. What would you say to that?
Well, Nigel, I mean, we don't look like a credible partner with our allies on so many issues right now. So, you know, the ability, you know, we've done a very poor job at defending, you know, being ready to defend our own territory in the Arctic. You know, we're not getting and we're not showing commitment. And again, the Trudeau government is very much responsible for this, but we're not seeing a strong case from any of the opposition parties about getting to 2% of defense spending, you know, a primary ingredient in credibility. So, you know, there is death by 1,000 cuts. And I think, as you're alluding, I mean, it might be more than a cut. It could be a full slice, right? I mean, so I do think we have the added issue, as Canadians will be aware, but it's very good to put this, is that, you know, in an election year in the United States, we're going to hear a lot of things articulated. Americans have a lot of concerns about the border. While many of those relate to the southern border with Mexico, you know, you can be sure, I mean, we've seen it already, that, you know, that also turns attention to the northern border and what's going on in the northern border. And given how important to us trade, movement, you know, whether it's for going to Taylor Swift concerts or whether it's, you know, sealing the deal on a multi-billion-dollar automotive or oil exports, whatever, you know, that relationship is crucial to us. So I think, you know, we have to be extra attentive here, not necessarily because we're worse or we're better or the problems are more severe or they're more light, but the politics of this are clearly very, very explosive.
Well, let me push you on that point a little. Alex. How damaging would it be to trade across the border if a serious event was perpetrated in the United States by people who were based in Canada as citizens or landed immigrants even?
You know, it would be politically an extremely hot potato. You have to keep in mind constantly that from the U.S. perspective, borders are as much a matter of security as about trade, right? They certainly have a stronger bias and willingness to disrupt international, like, trade flows into the country if they are, you know, if they see a risk there, whereas Canada is very much pushing more for open border, etc. So, you know, I think it's a bridge we don't want to cross, to be quite honest. Now, again, you know, like, if you talk at the official level, I mean, I think most people understand. I mean, these are shared issues. But, you know, there's a general perception that Canada is laxer and has fewer, you know, pointy end tools to deal with this. So, you know, I think we need to take it very seriously.
Now, in your view, how seriously does the government of Canada react to expert advice? I'm thinking back to the recently retired experience of the CSIS director, David Vigneault. Mm-hmm. Who was publicly diminished by the prime minister, who more or less said, well, you know, I'm paraphrasing the prime minister's remarks, but they were to the general effect that it's good that we've got these eager gumshoes, but they go overboard sometimes, and we have to give everything second thought and check and consider and so forth. I found that highly objectionable. Mm-hmm. Sure Mr. Vigneault did as well, and I noticed that he retired from his post not too long after that. But you have had 20 years in the system. How good are the links from people who actually discover something through their chain of command to the government of the day? Let's not be partisan. Right. It's a problem for both parties when they form government. How good are those links from the field to the boardroom table where the decisions must be made.
That's clearly a constant work and process, in a democracy with changing political staff, et cetera. In the Canadian case, we have a very, very stable bureaucracy, very professionalized, right up to the deputy minister level. So, there's always a building of trust that has to happen there on any policy issue on that. I think what's really obvious to me is that, national security still takes the back foot is in the kind of back burner pretty much constantly. So, that information, I think, it's harder to get, it's presented in ways that, show the government of the day what agenda, how it fits their agenda. And I think we've gotten very used in this country to thinking that, again, going back to this idea of exceptionalism, that, it's simply a case of meeting the government's agenda, as opposed to this, increasingly dangerous world intervening on that agenda. So, the government has made some good announcements in terms of setting up a National Security Council at the Privy Council office to address some of these issues. But that only comes down to how seriously the Prime Minister and his staff take those issues. And I think, for any country, no country wants to have to deal with these. You'd much rather focus on your prosperity, on your, the health and well-being of your people, et cetera. But, I think there needs to be a greater sense of awareness that this just goes with the turf, and that all those other things you want to do need to have that information flowing, the perspectives being collected, analyzed, put together by your police, by your border service officers, immigration officers, intelligence officers.
Alex, as we mentioned before, the two of the opposition parties have called upon the government to reconvene the Parliamentary Public Safety Committee to hear how this situation arose, where somebody who had been a member of ISIS allegedly became a Canadian citizen and now stands accused of plotting an atrocity here in Canada. I want you to just think about what would you say to that committee if they invited you to testify?
Mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, we need to think a lot about, some of the points I made earlier around how are we staffing these positions? What skill sets do we need to have? If you want to prevent these things, you need a pretty worldly security screening process. So again, people understand dynamics in different parts of the world, understand how those relate to Canada, have the tools both linguistically to analyze, assess, identify information elsewhere, have the digital tools that allow them to synthesize information, to pull together those pictures, et cetera. So, the human resourcing and how we develop those human resources and the technology, I think are absolutely central to having, tightening up this system and identifying the threat. Again, I would certainly have opening remarks in that respect to the fact that we have this world where we don't just have to worry about terrorists. We have to worry about espionage. We have to worry about proxies of foreign state governments that want to do us harm. We have to worry about, people who may have done corrupt actions, et cetera. People who are coming to intimidate Canadians because of their views about authoritarian regimes, dissidents, et cetera, who fled here and are speaking about their country. Ultimately, this is about protecting Canadians, whether they became a Canadian citizen yesterday or whether they were born here and, were born here. So, again, we can't indulge, I think, some of the problems of the past where, after 9/11, we became very focused on terrorism, one type of terrorism even. We have to understand that the world isn't going to help us on this. All kinds of people are coming at us from different ways. There's still lots of mostly benefit we can reap from being, open to the world. But if you're going to do that, there's a concomitant part that says, you need to take the national security part seriously.
In as much as the RCMP actually had suspicions, followed their suspicions, made an arrest, you might make the argument, well, actually, we're doing pretty well on this mission, and we're getting it right. You could say that, and I dare say they will say that.
Well, I don't want to downplay it. I mean, Nigel, it is a success. I mean, if you catch people before they do something, I mean, like we should be very grateful that the RCMP on this case and others, but I mean, others have slipped through. And you've spoken about this a couple of times. I mean, it is a dilemma, right? I mean, when the security services, when the police do their job, there is sometimes kind of an alternate reaction, like, oh, we're at risk, right? We're at more danger, because, but I think the thing is that, like this won't be the end of it. It's never like, wipe our hands and we're done. So, success can be success. Again, seems like a strong word here, doesn't it? When you, by the skin of your teeth, avoid a potential atrocity. But, Canadians can have confidence that the system, isn't entirely broken, but, it needs constant work and it needs to update. And I think Canadians really need to be on their government across public policy about the uptake on technology, the standards, the human resource standards of people. Again, I'm not denigrating anyone, and there's lots of very talented people. But, there always needs to be a focus on training. Military exemplary for that, right? Constantly training their people. Public service doesn't always do that.
And I think you made the point earlier that if you want to maintain the integrity of the entire system of immigration and international trade, this is the area that you have to get right.
Nigel, we're seeing this on so many issues, right? I mean, confidence in the economy, confidence in foreign investment, confidence in, drug makers, confidence in so many things. Like, we need to see that the government, when necessary, has the ability to intervene on issues, whether it is, again, a foreign state trying to buy into critical resources or acquire an airfield, in a place, port technology, port access, etc. Whether it's our financial system and the entry of dirty money into that. The integrity of these systems depends on taking the threat of nefarious, if you want to use that language, actors seriously. And, everything is not always going to be easy and is not always going to, unfortunately, people will take advantage of these things. Happily, in most cases, for far less serious issues. But, as you said, I mean, it's sort of a no-fail mission, right? And on many parts of this, I mean, even if you only let one bad person through, if they commit something, that's cannot be diminished. So that's what I would say there.
Alex, I think we should be glad of the good work of the RCMP in this case, and wish them more of the same. It's been great to have you on the show, sir, and certainly want to commend you for the work that you are doing in this area. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford, and thank you again to Alex Dale. All the best.